Wow. Welcome back to another Muse video. Thank you for all of the support recently on the Muse content. It's been really great. This video is going to be kind of all over the place structurally, but I'm going to put some timestamps in to hopefully give you an idea of what I'm talking about when, in case you don't want to listen to the whole thing. But I am just going to be talking through each song, and then as ideas about the whole album come to me, talking about them as and when. I made some predictions for what I thought was going to happen on this album, and I was totally wrong. That video is quite funny. I said The Dark Forest would be some sort of heavy build song, possibly the heaviest on the album. Shimmering Scars was going to have this like synth-led ambient soundscape and be more of a conventional song structure. Hush was going to be some acoustic Ghosts How Can I Move On successor with Ellie Goulding doing harmonies. And Space Debris was going to be like really heavy, close us out with a massive bang. And Sickness in You and I was going to have no 8-string guitar because that would ruin the effect of the 8-string being an Unravelling. All of that was totally wrong. People kept saying when Cryogen came out especially that they felt like Muse were surprising them again, and that it had been a really long time since Muse had done surprising, unconventional songs, like you really didn't know what was coming next. And I kind of agreed because Cryogen is a bit different and it has some unexpected things, but they're not that unexpected. You know, having a riffy outro is something they do live to their songs anyway. Reapers did it. Having a strange post-chorus bridge section is like really cool. It's one of the coolest things about the song, but it's not really that surprising. It's just quite different. And I was thinking, yeah, they'll surprise us, but in that way, in ways that are familiar to us. I thought when I made my predictions, they would be pretty spot on. I mean, obviously, that's why I made them in the first place. And I think the fact that every single one of them wrong really does actually validate the point of view that Muse are surprising again, and you actually don't know what is going to be in every song. I'm going to do this video backwards. Normally I do my rankings at the end of the video, but seeing as I've already uploaded one, I'm going to go through it now and then I'll sort of talk through why each song is at a certain place. And I have to say, this album is really great, and ranking all of these songs in order is super difficult for so many reasons, mainly because so many of the songs are good, also because I haven't been listening to these new ones for very long. It is the 26th today, and so I fully expect this to change in the future. And the third reason is that a lot of these songs are of a very similar quality, which means it's very difficult with very limited listening time to be able to rank them. But what I came up with was Be With You at 10th, Space Debris at 9th, Nightshift Superstar at 8, The Dark Forest at 7, Hush at 6, The Sickness in You and I at 5, Shimmering Scars at 4, Unravelling at 3, Hexagons at 2, and Cryogen at 1. Already, as I read that list back, I'm starting to think that some songs like Hush may actually deserve to move up slightly higher, but I think we all know that if we try ranking these songs, it's not going to be perfect, especially at this stage. My opinions are still forming on these songs, so as long as you remember to take that into account when I'm going through my analysis, it'll all be fine, because this album is amazing. I really love it, and I like all of these songs. There is not a single song on here that I think is bad or that I don't like. That fact is not true for Drones. It is not true for Simulation Theory. It is not true for Will of the People. The last time it was true was for The Second Law, but when I first listened to The Second Law, I didn't like it, and I thought it was like the worst or second worst Muse album. I used to think it was all over the place. I have since come around on it, and I really like every song on it now. But seeing as I've been listening to this album for less than 24 hours, which is only partially true given that half of the album was released as singles, the impression is really positive, and I've been trying really hard to make sure that I am not affected by recency bias. And you know, I don't think I am. I think this album might just genuinely be really good. So much so that I'm even going to lock in my album placement, and we'll see how this changes after a month or 6 months or a year, which is that Origin of Symmetry is still my number 1 album. Absolution, though, the same level of quality at number 2, just not hitting as many of my preferences as Origin of Symmetry does, but very evenly matched. Black Holes and Revelations slightly below, but again, a very similar level of quality at number 3. And then we have the Wow Signal at number 4. The rest of the albums are Second Law at 5, Showbiz at 6, Resistance at 7, Drones at 8, Will of the People at 9, and Simulation Theory at 10. I was working on my Black Holes and Revelations video. I was about 25 minutes through it by the time that this album came out, and so that will be coming out shortly, and I will eventually get around to reviews of all of these albums, but I'm going to talk through every song on this one, and then I'll release an update video once I finish my Will of the People review and then come around to finishing off all of my reviews of the Muse albums. I think the wow signal, in terms of its overall creativity, is on par with something like Black Holes and Revelations. Whilst I think Black Holes is a very high level of quality, especially in terms of the peaks of the album, I do think there are some songs that are not lesser. That sounds very harsh, because obviously I like all of the songs on Black Holes, just like I like all of the songs on Origin of Symmetry, on Absolution, on the wow signal. But songs like Hoodoo, City of Delusion, Soldier's Poem to a lesser extent, whilst I really like these songs in the albums and they function as something that is greater than the sum of its parts, I do think it's fair to say that those songs are not at the same level as stuff like Map of the Problematique or Starlight or Take a Bow. And comparing and contrasting with the wow signal, the only song that I would argue is lesser than the rest is probably Be With You. It is the simplest song on this album, and because it has multiple parts to it that are each in a different style, you know, starting off with the organ, sounds like it's going to be an orchestral piece perhaps, very reminiscent of Unnatural Selection, and then going into like a simulation theory electronic part, and then in the final bit we have a heavy section. I think the song never really found its feet, or at least doesn't allow you to really find your feet. I often feel by the end of the song I'm ready for more, which is useful because it serves as a bit of an intro into Hexagons, but I don't get the sense that the song is particularly effective in standing on its own 2 feet. And I'm not going to keep prefacing this, but I obviously really like Be With You. I've done an orchestral version of it. I've done a transcription of it. I think the melody in the song is really great. I really like Matt's vocals in it as well. But one thing that lets Be With You down slightly, other than the structural issues I just mentioned, is the mix. And this is a problem that affects all of the wow signal. Whilst I've put the wow signal at 4th place in my album rankings, and I've said that the level of creativity is on par with something like Black Holes and Revelations, one of the reasons the wow signal is going to struggle to beat Black Holes and Revelations and take the 3rd spot is because the Black Holes and Revelations mix is so much better than the wow signal. In fact, the Simulation Theory mix is better than the wow signal, because say what you want about that album, it's generally not as well received, but the mix on it is really good. During the heavier part of Be With You, it sounds like the song is clipping a little bit, or at least maximizing out. In fact, it's not that. I think that is happening because of the compression, but it more sounds like each note, the da-da-da-da-da-da, that is being panned between each ear with each hit. And I don't like it. It takes away from the impact. And there are a lot of moments in this album where there are strange mixing choices. I've already mentioned some of them in my previous reviews, and I'm going to go over them again because it is frustrating that the album is mixed in this way, when actually Will of the People is not mixed in this way and has a much better mix than this. And I think if the fault was to lie anywhere, it is to lie with Dan Lancaster. Now, I don't know this, obviously, but there is something very strange about the projects that Dan Lancaster attaches himself to. For example, he produced Won't Stand Down, which in terms of its heaviness and impact is a really effective song, mixed very well. And I know some people didn't really like the way Kill or Be Killed was mixed, but I personally did. I thought it worked. The only thing I had a reservation on was switching between the electronic drums and the acoustic drums, especially with the snare hits, but you know, that's part of the song, it's part of its songwriting. But so far, so good. He then mixed the Warnings album, Keep Me Fed, and this was where I was very disappointed. The Warnings' 3rd album, Error, has a really good mix. The guitar tones sound great, they're really impactful, I love the kick drum sound, it's just all good. And Keep Me Fed was meant to be a more heavy album for that group, with a more distorted guitar tone, and the end result was actually not a mix I was very happy with. I have to listen to it with the bass boosted, with it amplified, because if I don't, then there's no low end on this at all. Sure, the guitars are more distorted, there's a heavier sound, but there's not a heavier feel. In fact, the production feels a lot thinner than it previously did. And that same same treatment has been applied to the wow signal. Now this is very weird because some songs are mixed a lot better than others. Unravelling has a really great mix. I think that song has great heaviness, great low end, and I think it really works. But then when you listen to something like Cryogen, this is largely effective, but a lot of the background layers are not mixed very well and are not very clear. For example, in the bridge section of Cryogen, the I Am Collapsing Now section, the cellos in the back sound really muddy and they have no clarity. It's the same in the Dark Forest when we're hearing these choir and string sections all playing together. It's so muddy and forced into the background, I can't hear it. I would like the Hexagons guitar part, where it comes out of the tapping and transitions into the Knights of Sidonia bit. I would like that to be clearer. It's muddy. Space Debris should be a lot more beautiful than it is, but again, the strings are not clear. It sounds like they're significantly lacking the mids. There's also a fear to bring instruments forwards and backwards. Why not just bring the volume of the guitars down, force them into the background of the soundscape, and then bring some of the orchestral parts forwards when we want to focus on those? I don't see anything wrong with that if done in the right way, but instead we just force everything to be in its fixed position, and it's a really bad way to mix the album. I think it's true in Shimmering Scars in the climax, when the tremolo guitar comes in, it doesn't sound particularly distinct from the rest of the sounds, kind of all blends in together, and I feel like the falling tremolo guitar should have a lot more impact. And the most egregious thing that this album does in terms of its mix is on Nightshift Superstar, where instead of actually building a drop, using a riser, using layers, using pads, using layered guitars or vocals, we instead decide to place this filter where we attenuate all the mid frequencies and it makes the vocals sound really weird, but it's clearly intentional because that filter is not placed universally. It is only placed on those vocals pretty much and the drums, and the bass tone is totally clean, which is now so weird because now I've got a totally clean tone combined with this weird distorted filtered version of other instruments. It just sounds like a mess, and the only purpose is to make the bass solo more impactful. And like I said before, it is lousy. It is a really lousy production technique, and it shouldn't be happening to Muse. This is their 10th studio album. They should know better. But then again, there are many things they should know better on than to do. I am not looking forward to reviewing Will of the People one day. I'm kidding, I quite like a few of the songs on that album. So I think that's my complaint about the mix over with. And I think it would be fair to say as well that, you know, Origin of Symmetry, it does have a muddy mix, but at least you have the remixes. At least you can sort of piece together a perfect sounding version of that album for however you like it. And it was their second album, and it was recorded in 2001. And the problems in a song on that album's mix are consistent across all of the songs. And so once you ease yourself into the album, it doesn't really bother you. It's like watching a black and white movie. You just get used to it. But when you listen to something like this, where you're constantly moving between bits that are mixed quite well to bits that sound way too muddy, it does take me out of it ever so slightly. And I am nitpicking because often I'm not really focusing on the mix, but it is definitely something that I do pick up on, and it does have an effect. Right, so I've talked about the mix, I've talked about Be With You, I've talked about the ranking of my songs and where I put the album. What's left? I think the first thing to talk about would be the Dark Forest. You may have noticed that I put the Dark Forest in 7th place. Now, based on the market research, I guess you could call it, that I have been conducting using this channel, looking at how other people have ranked the album in the last 24 hours, the Dark Forest is either number 1 spot or somewhere in the top 3 or 5, right? It is clearly a song that most people are connecting with. And I think the song is good. I think all of the songs on this album are good, but this song is not grabbing me in the same way that I was expecting. I do think as an album opener, it is really great. I love the melody, the grand melody with the choir and the strings. It's got this harmonic minor melody going on. It's very classical inspired, and you feel that in its structure and the instrumentation. The low tenors in the choir make it sound particularly ominous. And remember when I did my Apocalypse Please video and I said one of the great things about Apocalypse Please as an album opener is the fact that you have this marching in the background and it feels like something is slowly but surely approaching you. You get that same vibe here, by using the gallop. That galloping rhythm underneath this grand melody, there is something enormous out there, and it is approaching, or we are approaching it. It's the same thing. But it's a very dark tone that's established right off the bat, which is great. But where I personally, and this is really nitpicking, just don't find that it fits with me and my tastes is the particular chords that are selected once we leave that intro and enter the first verse. We have a shift from a minor chord to a different major chord, and I was very surprised by this. I was expecting it. It's called the Dark Forest. I now know that it is related to a theory, the reasons behind why we don't find aliens and the Fermi paradox and all of that. I understand that now, but I was expecting it to be a lot darker, especially when we establish such darkness at the start with that opening. But now the song has a really jaunty feel to it with the way that the chords change and the percussion. It's a very light sound that we're accenting with. Sounds a bit like a tambourine. I know it's not a tambourine, but it sounds something like Ride of the Valkyries or something very reminiscent of that style of classical music. And it's fun and it's different and it's very Muse, but I personally just prefer a little bit more darkness. I know, I'm nitpicking, but the rest of the album is really good, and therefore, if I'm putting it in a ranking, other songs are going to come above it because of that reason, because of that preference of mine. And we do get plenty of darkness in the rest of the song. There are great orchestral elements as well. We can hear the strings. It would be great if they were mixed a little bit better, because then I'd be able to hear even more of the strings and appreciate them even more, but you know, we make do with what we've got. I appreciate that they're there, and it does make the song feel very operatic. One thing I really do like about the song is how unconventional its structure is. We get introduced to that melody, we then have this jaunty gallopy section, then we have the melody again, but this time we bring in the guitar, and the guitar is playing the melody, doing these little embellishments, and then we lose the melody once it's finished, and the guitar takes over, playing a solo, just kind of extending the melody to take us somewhere new. And then it dives into the galloping rhythm. Now we have that in the guitars, not just the percussion, which does make it feel a lot heavier and a lot different. We've kicked up a notch in intensity, and we have these great aggressive falling strings lines. I initially thought they were cellos. There might be a cello in there, but they seem like violins now to me. And we have this tapping arpeggio on the guitar that comes in, and the first chord is that minor chord, and it sounds really great. And again, I'm not opposed to the switch to a different major chord, but I do think it's weaker than it could have been. It could have been really dark had we utilized an arpeggio in line with that harmonic minor scale, making use of that sharp seventh. That was personally where I was expecting the next chord to go, but it's not a big deal. Again, these are the small reasons why it's at 7 and not going to be higher for me. And what I absolutely was not expecting was the choral chanting in Latin. Sounds very much like Ghost, like Year Zero or something. I absolutely love that. I can't think of any time that Muse have done that before. Correct me if I'm wrong. And the riff that we enter after is pretty heavy. It's not very heavy in terms of pitch, but it is in terms of the energy and the aggression, which I really like. Then we have the Latin choir coming back in, building up to that final melody that we heard right at the start to close us off. And then we finish that melody, we then extend out, very similarly to how we did when we heard it the second time. And we hear these sweeping strings, and it's really quite a beautiful moment. It's a little bit screechy. It's quite surprising. I can't quite work out exactly what the feeling is, but it's exactly how you would imagine the threat of aliens being scored in an orchestral scenario in a movie like 2001: A Space Odyssey, something like that, representing this imposing, terrifying threat. Maybe the strings are meant to sound like a scream, and that's why that works, but very good. I really like some of the lyrics, especially in that jauntier section. Broadcasting reckless confessions, that's really great. This idea that humanity doesn't know what's out there, they haven't got any idea what kind of danger they're putting themselves in by broadcasting signals out into space, hoping for a reply. Kind of reminds me of Fury. You'll pray that there's no God. You will pray that you do not have your messages answered, because if they were, we will all beg for extinction. A very dark song, and I like how it sounds very classical in nature, because again, we're talking about communication with aliens, and one of the things that is often put onto those Voyager vessels or these probes probes that are being fired out into space for long distances on the hope that an alien might find it. We put classical music records, we put music into these vessels. So it is fitting that this song sounds like that. It sounds like that message that we have sent out to the aliens. Okay, Nightshift Superstar. I think the transition into it works, even though it's not a direct transition from the Dark Forest into the siren sound. I do think it's something that works on the album. This song is a little bit more accessible, a little bit more mainstream. That's often how it's described. Although having said that, I don't really think this song is very mainstream. I think it has a very unconventional sound overall, but especially the bass line. People talk about this song because it has a disco sound to it, as if it's going to be this song that tops the charts or makes it into like number 10, top 10 on the charts. But really, this is very alternative, even if it has a more groovy sound. I think the bass line is great, and I really like the bass tone. I do think the bass tone could be slightly clearer. Again, another complaint about the mix. I'm very sorry to keep going on about it, but it would improve it. I really like how the bass line is in groups of 3 mainly, especially in the extended section, which is my favorite part of the song. The drums sound really heavy when we have the extended post-chorus bass line parts, and that bass tone is very heavy. You are simply not going to attract a mainstream audience with that sound, as well as the fact it's not mixed well enough to even nearly penetrate that market. It is frustrating, especially, but I think the chorus is really good. I like the little strings in the background leading into each bar. I like the verses and the groove in the verses. I think Matt's vocals sound really great in the choruses in this song. I like the sliding pitch synths in the back of the verses as well. Makes it sound very eerie, even though it's got a lot of upbeat energy. I've already talked about this song when it came out, so check out that video for more info. But my favorite part is the bridge, where we have the backing vocals and the strings all building up into the final chorus. And I really like the little ad-libs at the end of the final chorus. Matt's vocals are really adding a lot to the song. So I think the song is good. It's more accessible, it's more upbeat, it's more groovy, but it is still very different. It's different from other songs in the Muse catalogue, and it's different to other songs in this album. Very unique, and I enjoy it very much. The third song is Shimmering Scars. This was a serious surprise. It starts off with an acoustic piano part, which sounds really great, and Matt's vocals are the absolute highlight of this song. He sings it so well. Also, the lyrics are really good. This is probably the most breakup song on the album, but there are some really deep lyrics here. The coldest summer, you withdrew further, gave a little less, you took the sun away. Talking about how someone is pulling away from the singer. They're giving less, but taking everything. They took the sun away. Without the sun, you can't survive. So that's pretty dramatic. You say you're with me, then ghost right through me. I'll never understand how it slipped away. All I ever dreamed of has fled to the stars and hides in the dark. It's a really world-ending kind of breakup song. Really visceral lyrics. They tear me apart. If you say it's nothing, then why are your eyes still flooding? We stamped the embers out. I carried half the blame. Was I not enough? What still remains? I don't want to break. This song is really heavy, and probably the heaviest song Muse have written in a very long time, maybe ever, and I think that these lyrics are really served instrumentally as well. These lyrics deserve an enormous song, and that's exactly what you have. By the end of the song, you've got these tremolo guitars that have come in. The drum work, the drumming on this song is so good, so creative, so involved. The bass tone is so warm. I love when it comes in after the choruses as well and really fills the space. I think it's so good, and I love the little break in the middle when we have the organ part. I remember when Be With You came out and everyone was like, oh, the organ, it doesn't really fit on the song. But actually, if you think about this album and you think about the organ placement, especially here in this song, what do we associate organs with? We associate them with space and religion. And we actually do have some religious style in this record already, especially in the Dark Forest with the Latin singing in Latin, Lord have mercy, all of that kind of stuff. And I don't know why we associate the organ with space, probably because of its grandness and the echo, the reverb of the instrument, but maybe it's just Interstellar as well. But I feel like the reason that the Interstellar soundtrack is so famous is, sure, Hans Zimmer did a good job. But there must be something that makes us think that the organ is about space and gives that feeling of isolation and vastness. I mean, that is essentially the purpose of the organ in Megalomania all the way back in Origin of Symmetry. So I love that we have the organ here. I think it fits with the space theme of this album overall, and also lends groundness to this song that really deserves it because of the lyrical content and the heaviness of the themes and the drama in Matt's vocal delivery. And the final lyric, "I can't start again," is so sad, so touching, because often that is the fear, that is the concern, that when a relationship ends and you lose that, sure, you lose that person, but you've got to build that up again with someone new if you want that same thing or want to feel love again. And it's not that you're afraid of the time commitment, but it's like reverting back to a sadder time in your life. Even if you're unhappy in the relationship, there is often an impulse to remain inside of it because the thought of being on your own, isolated, like being in the middle of space, is an even more devastating feeling. So I really like Shimmering Scars, and that's why I put it so high. My initial reaction was very deep to it, and I'm very curious to see where it's going to fall in my ranking in a number of months' time, because I do think it has potential to move down on this ranking if other stuff starts appealing to me more and growing on me. But that doesn't change the fact that this song is really great, and I immediately recognized it as being really great. The next song is Cryogen. I already talked about this song when it came out, so I have talked about some aspects of the mix. And in my ranking, I put Cryogen right at the top of the list. And I think the experiment that we've got to run when ranking this album, which can be difficult because I've seen a lot of people put some of the newer songs right at the top, especially Sickness in You and I think you've got to imagine, at least what I was trying to do when I did my ranking was, imagine you have not heard any of these 10 tracks before. You have just been presented with this album. What ones would you be like, yes, those are the big songs, they're the great ones? And I definitely would pick out Cryogen as being one of those great songs. Another one of those is definitely Hexagons, and the other one would be Unravelling, and another would be Hush. I'm very surprised, to be honest, that the singles were Cryogen, Be With You, Unravelling, sure, I mean it was written first, and Hexagons. I'm not surprised about Nightshift Superstar. That is unsurprisingly a single. But if you showed me the 10 tracks and was like, right, which one of these do you think were the singles? I probably would have thought Nightshift Superstar, Shimmering Scars, The Sickness in You and I, probably either one of Unravelling or Hush, I'm not sure which one, probably Unravelling, and maybe Cryogen. But even though we have had Cryogen released as a single, and it's a big song and everyone knows it, I don't think actually that when you listen to the album, it does sound like one of the most obvious contenders for a single. I think the chorus is really big, and that's probably the thing that is making it the most likely to be a single, but the riff is a little bit weird. It's fuzzy. It's got that classical Baroque influence with the semitone right at the end when you're playing the G major arpeggio and then the F sharp major arpeggio, but it's got quite a strange bridge going on. I don't think we should underestimate quite how unusual that bridge is. It's like we do the verse, the chorus, and then we have an entirely different section that I'm going to call the Frostbite section. It's totally different. And then we transition out of that totally different section into a longer instrumental, more resistance-y intro kind of pre-chorus before launching into the pre-chorus proper. So structurally, we're really playing around with this. We're extending it out in a way that Muse just haven't done for years. It feels more like the small print to me, Cryogen does, than something like Stockholm Syndrome or Plug-in Baby, which is a comparison that I think is entirely superficial. Like, get over the fact that it's a fuzzy guitar tone. In what way does this song sound anything like Plug-in Baby other than the distorted intro and the guitar tone? Because this song is dark, and I think Plug-in Baby is quite uplifting. It's quite a major oriented song. No, Cryogen entirely different, and I don't think the outro is that similar to anything we've heard before. I did draw the comparison to Stockholm Syndrome in my first video when I listened to the song, but the accenting is different, the groove is different. I don't think it feels the same. Whereas the Stockholm Syndrome outro is this half-time version of the main riff, which is why it feels really heavy and a little bit slower. The Cryogen outro feels faster and more groovy, and we break it up. We have that lead part in there that takes us into a bass solo. I mean, how many times have you heard a bass solo like that in a previous Muse song? I mean, it just hardly ever happens. I don't think we can underestimate quite how different Cryogen really is. Like, I know I said before about the level of surprise. Sure, these aren't crazy things. These are all things Muse have done before, but the fact they exist in this song and in this way is genuinely really surprising. And it's super refreshing to hear Muse writing songs in this way. I've always wanted them to end their songs with more heavy breakdown riffs, like they did with Reapers, for example, because they end their songs live often with these kind of riffs. And it's great to have that kind of live energy that they show in their shows all of the time in the studio version of the song. And that's what Cryogen does, and I'm so glad that it does. One thing that does detract from Cryogen is the lyrics. Mainly the lyrics in the chorus, to be honest. Cryogen, I can never cry again. Cryogen, I'm freezing over. Yeah, this girl is nitrogen. When I first heard the live performance of this song, I assumed that the lyrics would be not as cold as nitrogen or something like that. This girl is nitrogen, just doesn't make any sense. So I do think the song falls down in the lyrics in the chorus, but the size of the chorus, the chords in the chorus, all really great stuff. This is number one for me at the moment. I do think, however, though, that Hexagons could become the number one on this album for me, but it's a very close race between those two. But at the moment, I'm very happy having Cryogen at the top. It's got a cool riff, it's got a big chorus, it's got a good verse groove, the pre-chorus is dark, the chord choices in the chorus are also quite unconventional. It's not just 4 chords, there's some movement in between the chords there. The Frostbite section is really cool, varying it up. I love how in the middle of the Frostbite section, we hear the outro riff. The fact it has an outro riff is really cool. I love the ambient pre-chorus and then the more ominous pre-chorus before the final chorus. I like how we bring the guitars out and then bring them back in for the final one. And I love his falsetto going into the final chorus and into the final riff as well. I mean, what is not to love about this song? Genuinely, it's great. The next song is Be With You, which we talked about, and then we have Hexagons immediately after. The fact this was a single is incredibly surprising to me. Like, if I didn't know what the singles were beforehand, I would have thought that that would have been an album track that would have been a great surprise and one of the best on the album. And it is definitely second, if not joint first. It's really good. This song is really great. I love how it switches up the different time signatures, starting off in 4/4 and then moving into 6/4 for the main section of the song, and then coming back to 4/4 for the outro. I love that the main part of the song is in 6/4 and the song is called Hexagons. One of the things that I would have predicted that actually did come true, one of the few predictions I actually got right about this album, was that a song about hexagons would be revolving around the number 6. I would have the time signature in 6. In the lyrics, Matt talks about being drawn into the 6th dimension. And at the end, when we're in the final 4/4 outro section, the synth arpeggios behind are doing triplets, so we're still combining 3s and 4s throughout this whole song. I really love structurally, much like Cryogen, how it's not afraid to just give you a new section, particularly in this song when you're not expecting it. I'm thinking of the falsetto section after the first verse, which comes out of nowhere. The structure of this whole song is quite random, to be honest. It starts off with that tapping intro, and because rhythmically in this song we're doing a lot of exploration of mixing up time signatures and rhythms, we have the tapping being on every 8th note, but at the end of a measure for the final quarter note length, or maybe for the final 2 quarter note lengths in some measures, instead of every 8th note being tapped, it is actually being done in triplets. We are modulating to a triplet rhythm. A lot of people, when they first heard this, were saying, oh my god, they're changing the tempo, they're slowing down. They're not doing that at all. If you actually count the song, it's in the same tempo, it's just that you're quickly switching from 8th notes to triplets. Or I guess it's 16th notes to triplets, because when you're tapping, you have the note that you press, and then you have the pull off, the note that rings out once you remove your finger. But hearing tapping is quite unusual for Muse. Think about other songs where we've heard tapping. Sure, there's Reapers, but I personally think this song sounds a little bit more like In Your World, certainly to start with that Baroque influenced riff. And once we have the tapping, we have the drums come in with these guitars behind it as well. And once we have the tapping, the guitar then goes into a melody, like a solo almost. And the direction of the solo initially feels very random. It doesn't feel very purposeful. But I quite like that. It's almost like you can hear it working out where the song is going to go in real time. It's keeping you in limbo and suspense until it finally plummets down in some quite rapid tapping to what I've been calling the Knights of Sidonia Sidonia section, when the guitars and the drums come in, and we hear these higher pitched, almost electronic tom fills, which sound very reminiscent of the intro, the Ennio Morricone intro to Knights of Sidonia Live. It also sounds a bit like the Space Dementia outro at times. That is one complaint I do actually have about this song. I do like these building sections that sound reminiscent of Knights of Sidonia, but I think it maybe sounds a little bit too derivative of previous work. Whereas I don't think Cryogen really has many substantial similarities to songs like Plug-in Baby at all, I do think that this part of Hexagons is very similar to other things. And genuinely, that is probably the reason it is at number 2 instead of being number 1, because the way that this song makes me feel during the chorus is amazing. It is peak Muse. You've got these rising arpeggios. The arpeggios in the synthesizers are rising and falling throughout the song at different points. We're normally doing 16th notes, but sometimes it's triplets. These rapid arpeggios sound like something from Apocalypse Please, but they're so much louder and more digital and more like a square wave in this song. It really feels like you're being abducted by aliens, or that you're falling through the time vortex or something. And I feel that there are some really sinister moments or dark moments in this song. The falsetto section, which is really airy and light, feels really sinister. Once we crash out of the first Knights of Sidonia section, we have a very subdued section, which is very dark because of its lyrical content. It sounds almost acoustic and peaceful, but again, we have that contrast that we used to have a lot of in early Muse between pleasant instrumentals and very dark lyrics. Gorge on my soul when I'm weak and dying. After which we explode into the first heavy section with these rising arpeggios. The chord progression is a really classic Muse one as well. It goes from E minor and then up a fifth to B major, and B major uses an E flat, which is a sharp 7th of the E minor scale, so we're in E harmonic minor, but we go from E minor to B major to A minor and then to C major. And if you've watched my other reviews, especially the Origin of Symmetry one, that is the exact same chord progression, really, those two chords that underpin Newborn and lots of other songs as well in Origin of Symmetry, such as Space Dementia. But where in Space Dementia we start on E minor and then go down to the major third first, E minor to C major, and then at the end go to B major, we instead go from E minor to B major and then at the end go to C major. So it's a little bit of a rearrangement of that chord progression. So Hexagons is an incredible song, one of the best on here. I have a video on it already, so check that out if you want to hear more of my thoughts that I'm probably forgetting off the top of my head when recording this video. And I love how it ends and transitions into the next song, which is The Sickness in You and I. This song is really interesting. It's got a great heavy riff, which we hear in the bass line in the verses as well. It's following more of a conventional song structure than many of the other songs we've heard so far. My only complaint about this song really is that it's quite short. It doesn't last for very long. And at the end of the song, there is this incredibly heavy 8-string breakdown. And the problem is that it doesn't really go on for very long, like we have it, and then just as you're getting into it, expecting a new variation, the song is actually over. And transitioning perfectly into Unravelling, which I didn't mention in the predictions, but I didn't think that was going to happen. And that's why I didn't mention it. Because when you look at the length of the song, I was just convinced that it was already short. There wasn't going to be enough time to put the Unravelling intro into the outro of this song, because we could see from the track length, Unravelling wasn't going to have that intro in the actual track itself. But yet again, I was pleasantly surprised that we do actually have it. And when we hear it, we can hear some vocals in the background as well that we couldn't hear from the live performances. But the con of that is that it does make this song incredibly short. But fortunately, there is a lot going on in this song that is worth mentioning. I think this is the first time since Simulation Theory that the Prince influence has really returned in Matt's vocal delivery. Certainly in this song, his style is very poppy, very Princey. It's got that propaganda feel to it. And the riff is so groovy and so heavy. It's really great. One of the things I like in particular is how it operates rhythmically. It's a syncopated riff in groups of 3. So the drums are playing a 4/4 backbeat, as you'd expect for Muse, and the riff is actually carrying over the bar line because each note is worth 3. I don't know what the subdivisions would be, like 16th notes or 8th notes or whatever it is, but it repeats in 3s, carries over the bar line, and then we end it early to line back up with the 4/4. But that's really important because when we have the heavy 8-string breakdown part of this song, the reason it feels heavy is because when you hear that rapid chugging, it's falling evenly on every downbeat, which is not how the riff has operated up to that point. And so it feels like the riff has slowed down, when actually it hasn't. We've, again, just placed our accents slightly differently, which is exactly what we did in Hexagons as well. Slightly different way of doing it, because we were going from 16th notes to triplets, but we're given the illusion of a change of pace without actually changing the tempo, just changing the placement of the notes within the bar. And once we have that more even chugging on each downbeat, we go back to the syncopated riff, but this time in a heavy variation. But like I said, it's over before you know it, really. The drumming is doing some excellent work in this final breakdown. Absolutely love it, and I love when the syncopated part comes back in but not at the start of the bar line, because it's picking up from the syncopation that we didn't do but we would have done in place of that more even heavy chugging that we did. There are some weird elements to the song. We have like these more poppy parts where after a section in the verse we sort of just hear like a synth line or the kick drum or something like that, and then we hear a pop noise. I think actually, even though I've said that the influence sounds very much like Prince, I do get kind of Arctic Monkeys vibes a little bit, like AM Arctic Monkeys, from the verses in this song. And I've got to be honest, I wasn't really sure about Matt's singing of Sick initially in the chorus in his falsetto, but actually it has really grown on me over a couple of listens. The chorus is not my favourite in the album, but I think it is still very good and works well for the song. So I do see a lot of people putting The Sickness in You and I right at the top of their lists. For me, it isn't there, and I have explained why, but hopefully you can see that I do really like this song because I'm a big fan of metal. I like Gojira, I like Meshuggah in particular, and I've always loved heavier songs from Muse. I think that much is evident from the songs that I normally place higher up in my rankings. And I've always wanted Muse to have a more heavy album where they just did straight wall-to-wall heavy riffs and bangers, and whilst I always wanted that, I never really thought that they would do that. But I think one of the reasons that I like this album so much is because this is effectively the album I've always wanted from Muse. I remember during their last tour when they were playing a lot of riffs in the outros to certain songs. They played a lot of Slipknot riffs like Duality, and I appreciated them playing those heavier riffs, but they didn't really sound that heavy because of the fuzziness on their guitars. Muse's general live rig doesn't really translate to playing songs of Slipknot or bands like that have a more classic drop B distortion tone. Although Muse could do it with some of their heavier gear, but they don't normally seem to play these songs with that. And there was a time on that tour where they played the Stranded riff, and I love Gojira, and I'm like, that is pretty heavy for Muse to be playing, and I really have always wanted them to go into that sort of territory of their heaviness, make an album around that kind of sound, and this is why this album appeals to me so much. It's not perfect, but it is pretty close to the style that I've always wanted them to explore more of. And I just quite frankly never thought that we would get an album that sounded like this, that had this many heavy songs. I can understand people having the criticism of it's only 10 songs and there's too many heavy ones, not enough variety. I can understand that because especially when you look at stuff like Black Holes and Revelations and Absolution, often what are people's favourite album, they are variety pack albums. They have a lot of different songs going on there. Supermassive Black Hole sounds very different to Nights of Sidonia or City of Delusion. Endlessly sounds very different to Hysteria or Stockholm Syndrome or Apocalypse Please. If some songs don't work for you, then that's okay, because there probably is a song that does. But if you don't really like heavy songs, then this album is going to be tough for you because there are so many. And it's very fortunate that I do like Heaviness. But because Muse normally do a variety of stuff, even on stuff like Simulation Theory, I didn't really think that they would ever make an album that was focused primarily just on one style, because they'd have to do a variety of different things. Their creative drive would just force them into making lots of different sounding songs all on one album. But that isn't what we got here, and I happen to be very happy about that. Like, sure, there are some production things and nitpicks that I can make because I am a fan, I'm very into music, I'm gonna make those points. But I know in the grand scheme of things, they're not that important. And actually, I've got a space-themed album, which was one of the things I always wanted from Muse, and I have a really heavy album. Like, I can understand if you think there's too many heavy songs on here, but for me, this is everything I've wanted, really. I've wanted an album that does this for a while. And the fact that so many many of these unreleased tracks were heavy was a surprise. I didn't predict that in my predictions video. I knew that this song would be, but I didn't think that Hush would be, and I didn't think that Shimmering Scars would be quite as dramatic and emotionally heavy as it was. And there are some parts of this song that are heavier than I really thought that they would go. When we think about the heavy riff that they play, the way that they mainly increase the intensity, sure, they detune it, they use heavier guitars, they move down onto the 8-string guitar, but they also change up the rhythm and have this almost tremolo or gallopy kind of picking going on, which is very technical and requires a great deal of accuracy actually. They're playing very fast. This is not a level of technicality I've seen, a level of technicality in the rhythm playing specifically from Muse. Certainly not in this style of music, this style of heavy metal. You know, this does feel a lot more like deathcore, like a fast, traditional technical breakdown. And that's not the kind of breakdown that we normally have with Muse. We normally have more of a groove down, if you know what I mean, like in Stockholm Syndrome, or Microcuts, or Agitated. Another nitpick I have about The Sickness in You and I is at the end of one of the choruses or verses, he does his falsetto singing, and I feel like the note he reaches isn't high enough. I feel like we can reach a higher note that's in key that we reached earlier in this album. The high note in Cryogen is really effective, and that is a lot higher than where he sings in Sickness in You and I. So again, I'd like that to be just ever so slightly higher. And these transitions into the different songs are so cool. My pre-order of the album arrived, so I now have a vinyl record of it, and I was looking through the different sides. And side A is The Dark Forest through to Be With You, and then side B starts with Hexagons, and then you get all of the transitions on the record. So you get Hexagons to Sickness to Unravelling, and then you also get Hush and Space Debris, of course. But that's really cool that all of those transitions are on one side of the record. I imagine that probably motivated where they were going to put the tracks in the track listing. And so we get the lead into Unravelling, which is a song every Muse fan should be familiar with by now because it was released a whole year ago. I never made a video on it, but I've always liked Unravelling. Whereas Be With You has these different sections in different styles, like the organ, then electronic, then heavier, Unravelling has a similar style to it, but I think it works a lot better here. We have an electronic verse with some arpeggios, and these arpeggios of the chords are really great. They seem to be rooted around F sharp minor as a key. This tonal center does actually shift because by the time we make it to the chorus, we seem to have moved into more of an E minor territory, which is a neighboring key. We haven't strayed too far, but we are introducing chords that don't really fit into a single key across the whole song. This synth verse is really good at building up tension, and towards the end of the verse, the texture of the synths change. Either there's another one being layered on top, or that synth is becoming more open in its sound and less closed off. I also really like the sinister vocal delivery from Matt in these verses, especially when he moves into his falsetto in the I'll Lie Beside You sections. Really great delivery. And I like in these verses as well that we have these electronic drums because they're fitting with the synthesizers. This is very similar to a technique used in Kill or Be Killed where the drums are electronic in the build-up, and then once we hear the Kill or Be Killed and get into more of the riff, we can hear the drums acoustically. And that's exactly what happens here. We hear the acoustic drums in the pre-chorus, in the build-up, in the riffy sections, and the chorus, and we reserve those electronic drums for the electronic verses. I really like that. This song is such a surprise if you've never heard it before because it starts off and you think it's probably going to be like a simulation theory kind of song because it has that vibe of The Void, arpeggiating synths and a really dark melody. But then all of a sudden you hear this riff, and it's a very Mick Gordon inspired riff. It sounds like something from Doom Eternal in my opinion, and it's got these minor third jumps in it and this moody G minor feel, and it builds up and explodes, and it's already really heavy. It's got so much impact when that riff comes in, and then it transitions immediately into an enormous chorus using some feedback, and the chorus is possibly the highlight of the album. It's easy to overlook it because it's been out for so long, but like I said, if you imagine you haven't heard any of these songs before, these 10 tracks are presented to you, which ones would you pick out as being the best songs? Unravelling, you would definitely pick out. I think a lot of people are tired of it now, but we cannot underestimate how good this song really is. That chorus is the biggest on this album. I love the lead in the background that arpeggiates the chord shapes. I think his vocals in this chorus sound amazing. It was one of the things I noticed when I saw Muse live and he performed Verona, which is not a song that I really like. Like, it's okay, but it's not my thing. But when I heard it live, I really enjoyed it because Matt's vocals are so expressive and so strong that it elevated a song that I'm not really a fan of. And I haven't heard Unravelling live, but I feel like his vocals would be so impactful in this chorus. It's really great, one of their best. Then we have another verse, which this time skips the riff and goes straight into the chorus, after which we have this bridge section that's building up more tension, and you're like, where are we gonna go? And you think you've already heard the big riff, the heaviest riff of the song, but then the song hits you with a breakdown. And we had heard breakdowns. We'd heard the one in Kill or Be Killed, which was cool, but it's not that intense. But the one in Won't Stand Down is quite heavy, but mainly because of the speed of the double bass, of the picking in the riff. The actual tone of the song remains the same. In Unravelling, whereas we were already in a detuned heavy riff, the breakdown is detuned even further, so it's like a breakdown in pitch, but it's also chuggier and following a different rhythm, a more spaced out one that feels slower even though it's not. But it still has that minor third jump that the original riff had, so it's a heavier variation of it. Not really sure what the pitch is, I've got to be honest, I can't work it out because it's just too heavy. I think it's in drop E in the guitars, but I have seen people say drop B. I don't really know. I did a Synthesia tutorial of it, and the piano wouldn't go lower than a B, so I don't really know. And then this transitions brilliantly into a solo. Now, my only nitpick with the song, the only reason I wouldn't give the song 10 out of 10 is because the solo is very short. It's like how in Hysteria there are two parts to the solo. There's the arpeggiating part and the bit that follows the vocal melody. Well, when I listen to the Unravelling solo, I feel like I've listened to the first half of a solo that should have a second half, but it just doesn't. It's too short. And when I did my orchestral version of Unravelling, I did extend the solo to play something that I thought would fit, because I think that's a missed opportunity. But again, a very small nitpick, because the solo that we do have follows the melody in the chorus, and it's really good. And we end the song with another riff and another breakdown, which is exactly the same as what we'd heard. So this song is really great. The thing that makes this song is, on one hand, the experimentalism, because we are using heavier gear, 8-string guitars, detuning very heavily and using breakdowns in the structure. And the second thing is its size. It's a massive song that really stands out from other songs on this album, even though it was released a year ago, because its scale feels enormous, especially in that chorus. A really great song, and I wouldn't be surprised if I moved it up on my list. But Cryogen and Hexagons are both really good songs, so there's really not much in it. Another one of my concerns was how Unravelling would fit into this album, as the singles we'd heard up to the point of release hadn't actually featured any more of the 8-string guitar, so were nowhere near as heavy as Unravelling was. And one of my predictions was that Sickness and You and I wouldn't have that 8-string guitar, because if you add a really heavy breakdown to that song, then it takes away from the heavy breakdown in Unravelling. But it turns out the way you make Unravelling fit on the album, because I now think that it does fit, is that you add the 8-string guitar into loads of songs. Even though there's a really heavy breakdown in Sickness and You and I still think the heaviest point is the breakdown in Unravelling. Unravelling is a lot bigger than Sickness and You and I in general, and the 8-string is in Hush. Now, my predictions of this song are totally wrong. I thought this would be an acoustic song. I thought it would be more like Ghosts, How Can I Move On? Like how when we released those alternate versions of How Can I Move On, where Matt harmonized with other singers, that Italian singer, and there was another one. I do like those versions, and I kind of prefer them to the original, to be honest. I thought this would be a similar thing to that, and it totally isn't. The only thing I vaguely got right in my prediction was that it might be in C minor. I think I said that, which it is. The key is C minor, and we haven't had a Muse song in C minor for a while. But we are again detuning the guitars down to drop C. These are not usual tunings for Muse, and I really appreciate that. In fact, the entire album has got detuning and non-standard tuning across different songs. Each song feels like a different one. Now, this song opens with its riff, and the riff is so good. I know I've put Hush at 6, but actually I think it's going to move up, because I think this song is better than Sickness and You and I already laid out a couple of my grievances with that, but I don't have any of those problems that I do with that song in this one. People were saying it reminds them of Newborn, and I can kind of see that in the speed, but I never really felt that in terms of the melody. I more feel like this is similar to Falling Away With You, in the way that the melody of Falling Away With You descends continuously, which I talked about in my Absolution review. It keeps going down and then moves back up at the end. I think the direction overall of the melody is very similar to this riff in Hush, and the guitar tone makes this riff so heavy. So I think of it as Evil Falling Away With You, and it's just amazing. I love that riff so much. It's one of my favourites off this album. Like, Hexagons is great and Be With You are really great songs, but the riff in Hush is better than any riff in either of those songs. And the more I listen to it, the more it grows on me. Another really cool thing about this song is there are time signature changes, and there is 6/8 all over this album, or 6/4 or 3/4, whatever it is. We're using multiples of 3 a lot more. I think this is the album where we use it the most in all of Muse. I don't think we've ever used 4/4 less than in this album. And it's really surprising that they're making an album at this stage in their career that is potentially, certainly in terms of rhythm, one of their most progressive. This song starts off with a riff in 4, and then when it enters the verse, I think it would be fair to call it 6/4. We repeat each measure after 6 beats, so I'm going to call it 6/4. And that makes us feel really uneasy because we lock into this 4/4 groove, and now all of a sudden we're trying to follow this 6 groove, and we have these piano arpeggios laying out the kind of rhythm we should follow. And they're not really arpeggios, they're more like chords that are rolled, which is a very, very quick arpeggiation, I suppose. But we have these chords and they're very unusual. I haven't quite worked out exactly what they are, but they're very unsettling and they're very unnatural. Even though we're in the key of C minor, they are establishing a lot of tension within each chord itself. There are notes played in the chord shape that maybe don't quite fit, that are forming a cluster tone. And once we've established that, there is this sort of Billie Eilish part, sounds like Bad Guy, where we're singing on the offbeat, but we still have the kick on each downbeat. I think that's really cool. And then we enter what sounds like a pre-chorus, but is later going to be understood to be our chorus. But this first one doesn't feel like that. It feels like a pre-chorus, like we're holding back. And I love the lyrics, they're really great. It's getting too loud, don't let it drown us out. It's you and me now, there's chaos all around. Lose yourself, free yourself, feel, and I love the way that they sing feel and going up in pitch in their falsetto. Take a breath and hush. And once we hear the title of the track, we hear that enormous riff again. And then in the second verse, we have the Ellie Goulding jump scare, which, if you didn't know that was going to be in this album, would definitely surprise you, because this is the first time in a Muse song, if I can remember rightly, where the lead vocal is actually sung by someone who isn't a band member. But strangely, her vocals do suit the song. I was fully expecting, as I said in my predictions video, for this to be awful, and for it to not work at all, and I had real pessimism. I am so glad I was wrong, because actually I don't think she feels out of place at all. Like, it is a bit out of place because it's a Muse song and it's very unprecedented. But really, in the grand scheme of things, she fits. She fits on the song. And it has surprised me how at ease I am with hearing Ellie Goulding sing lead vocals on a Muse track. It does make me wonder how they'll do it live. Potentially at some of the London shows that they're doing, Ellie Goulding might be there. I wouldn't be opposed to that or be surprised by that. But if they're going to play Hush in like America, where Ellie Goulding probably isn't, I imagine they're not going to take her on tour with them. So would Matt just sing the second verse? I don't see why not. But it would be curious to see how they're going to go about tackling that. And there are so many things to love about this song. I love when the guitar lead comes in. I mean, it doesn't really sound like a guitar solo because there's a riff, there's so much happening in the layers of the song. You can't really focus on the guitar lead, but it has this really screechy, soaring tone to it, very similar to Shimmering Scars. And I love it. I really buy into this song, and I really love the variation of the riff. Because there comes a point in this song where they just start playing the riff. They play it as you heard it before, and they do it a couple times, and then they do it again, but this time even heavier, even lower in pitch, or it would sound like palm muting if I knew that it wasn't. But this song is amazing. It's really big. I buy into it. I love the drama. I love the scale. I think it's gonna move up. I think it's actually my 4th favorite song on this album. I think it's Cryogen, Hexagons, Unravelling, and then Hush. That's where it is at the moment. So yeah, really growing on me, this song. I like it a lot. And the next song, the last one, is Space Debris. Again, my prediction was totally wrong. I was expecting this song to be very dramatic to close us out of the album, and it turns out it's not. It's more of a situation like The Last Vigil. To quickly explain that, The Last Vigil is the closing track on Meshuggah's album Kolos, and every track up to that one on Kolos is extremely heavy because it is Meshuggah. And then after that, the last song is an instrumental called The Last Vigil, which is this clean tone guitar playing these reverbed parts that repeat, and it's like putting you to bed. The album has beat you up pretty mercilessly, and now you're being put to bed by a nice, smooth, soft lullaby song. And that is kind of what Space Debris is. When you think about all of the songs so far, with the exception of Be With You, even though that has its moments, they've all had heaviness in one way or another, and some of them have been very heavy, like the breakdowns in Unravelling and Sickness. I'll be honest, I was expecting Space Debris to grow on me more than it has, and I put it in 9 on my list, but I think I would actually put it at 10 and put Be With You above this song. Because this is the song that is really let down by the mix, I think. This is a song that goes for a very atmospheric, very spacey vibe, with what is meant to feel like a very vast and expansive soundscape, like you're floating in space. But actually, everything feels unclear, especially the percussion, and when we bring the strings in at the end, I don't feel like I can really make them out in as much clarity as I should be able to. The mix on this record is more like The Resistance, where I think that album is in desperate need of a remaster. I think this one is too. One of the best Muse mixes on any album is the mix on The Second Law. That is one of the best. I can hear every single thing on The Second Law, and that's how I want the wow signal to sound. And it's a great shame that it doesn't quite meet the level of mix that they have achieved on previous albums. And I feel like the orchestral elements and the percussion really suffer in Space Debris because of that quality of mix. It's just not good enough. It's not doing the song service, and it should sound more like Unravelling, or it should sound like something off The Second Law. This song would sound like a Second Law song, and should be mixed like that. It should be mixed accordingly. I want to be able to hear the strings in the same level of detail that I can in Explorers, and I can't, and that is a shame. And I do think this song is offering you less than other songs, even like Be With You, because I can appreciate the energy of Be With You, and I really like it solo. This song is going for one thing in particular, and I don't think that it executes it perfectly, so it has to fall down to the bottom. However, one thing I do really like about this song is how it's not afraid to take pauses of silence and take its time to get to its point. I do really like the ending of the song, and I think as an album closer, it is quite effective. But this isn't really like Street Spirit on the bends. I feel like it's a suitable comparison to draw. Even though they're not going for the same things, there is a similarity there, and Street Spirit is very effective because you really buy into the scale of that song, even though it's more subdued. Whereas I struggle to buy into that with this song, and I do therefore think if it was either mixed better, or if the album closer was more of a heavy track, that would be a better choice. But I do think I'm leaning towards a Last Vigil situation where we're leaning towards a softer, more subdued album closer to wrap us up in a nice warm blanket after the wow signal has beaten us with its heavy riffs for 40 minutes. But where this song does have a good similarity to something like Street Spirit is in the depth of the lyrics. These have really stood out to me more than some of the other songs, especially in the second verse. Love like this can't age with grace. It burns and dims in a cold, vast, empty space. Orbit slow as our bond decays, like space debris. Love can drift away. I think this is really interesting, especially in the light of Matt's divorce, which was the main inspiration for a lot of the lyrics on this song. It's very interesting that he's able to recognize that between two people, sometimes when they fall in love, there is no capacity for that love to last. And his conclusion is that it's the makeup of the people. If you're not actually the right people to make that love last and age with grace, then what it will do is it will burn really brightly, and it's an acknowledgement of those happy times, but it will dim as opposed to continue to burn as brightly as it does. It's almost like an opportunity cost thing, where two people can have the best times, but they won't last. Whereas you might have, and this maybe isn't the direct conclusion, but maybe not as passionate or brightly burning love, but it may last and it may develop into something greater. Matt's concluding that the love that he had, even if it had the capacity to do that, has turned out to have burnt very brightly and dimmed, leaving him in a cold, vast and empty space. And it's a really sad thing to think about, the bond between these two people who had such a brightly burning love. Their bond is decaying, and now their love is drifting away. And I think about the lyric from Shimmering Scars, the "I can't start again." We have different lyrics throughout this whole song. At the end of the song, we have lyrics like, "As the drugs invade." So maybe there's this idea that to fill the void that we mentioned at the start of the song, we might turn to recreational substances that do us more harm and give us short-term relief. "I'm not what she craved," dealing with issues of self-worth and image. Because I don't think this is a recognition of, I just don't happen to be the person that she wanted. It's probably the fact that the singer wasn't good enough for what she wanted, even if they were good enough from their perspective. And from the other person's perspective, it wasn't enough. "Orbit slow as her soul decays." And I don't think this means that, without the singer, this person will feel an emptiness and their soul will die. I think what it means is that from the singer's perspective, their memory of this person and what they represented on a deeper fundamental level to them in their heart, their soul is decaying. The singer will eventually lose a part of themselves because she has drifted away. And we end the song with "She will drift away." And it's really melancholy and sad. So where this song instrumentally I don't think quite hits the mark, the ideas are there, but the mix just isn't. I think the lyrics are really great. And there are a lot of drum fills going on in this song, and Matt singing in his falsetto and some really belting great vocals. So compositionally, I'm in favour of this song, and I think the lyrics are by far the best thing about it. It's really great. I think it's probably tied with "Be With You." So re-evaluating that ranking, I would say at the top, Cryogen, Hexagons, Unravelling. I mean, honestly, just sort of take your pick. All of those songs are of the same quality, so let's have joint first place, because any order of them is arbitrary. And then at fourth place, Hush. At fifth, Shimmering Scars. At joint 6th and 7th, I'm going to have The Dark Forest and The Sickness in You and I. But I do think Sickness has the edge, so Dark Forest will be remaining at 7, which I know is annoying a lot of people. But I've explained it's nothing wrong with the song, it's just my personal preferences. I'm not a huge fan of Knights of Sidonia anyway, and this is Knights of Sidonia 2.0, many people are saying. So go check out my Black Holes and Revelations video, which is now out by the time I upload this, where I explain my thoughts on that song. At number 8, we have Nightshift Superstar, which is annoying because I really like that song, but it's been booted down by all of this brilliant stuff that's come out from the album. And Nightshift Superstar is seriously let down by its mix at times, especially in the build up to the drop. And then at the bottom, in joint 9th and 10th, Space Debris and Be With You. I can't pick between the two. It really just depends on how I'm feeling on that day. So there you have it. There's the wow signal. I am so happy with this album. This is definitely the kind of thing I've been waiting for. Matt did mention a piano-based song which didn't make it on the album, and he said it might be released as a B-side, which I would definitely like to hear, and would be very curious to hear if it would fit on the album. Whether or not for Black Holes and Revelations it would be equivalent to Crying Shame, which I don't really think would fit on that album, or Easily, which is a B-side that I do think would fit on that album. So I'm very curious to see how that one pans out if it ever gets released. And I uploaded my album rankings as well, so I'm going to put up reviews of all of the other albums. I've already done Showbiz, Origin of Symmetry, Absolution and Black Holes and Revelations. The rest will be coming out soon, so like and subscribe to stay tuned for that. There will be more Muse content coming out, and thank you so much to all the people who have supported so far. It's been really great. This channel has been doing really well this month, and I love doing this, but it's only possible because of all of the liking and subscribing and sharing that is going on. Comment your ranking below. I'm very curious to hear what people are saying. It's been great to talk to you guys in the comments of my YouTube shorts and on my Wow Signal videos, so like and subscribe because it really helps out the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.